Today, I'm showing you how to take photos of your pieces to sell on Etsy or to post on social media. Hey, my name is Misha and I'm a full-time ceramicist and a studio owner, and I'm here to help you pursue your creative dreams. We'll go over the setup, the lighting, the angles, and we'll answer the question on whether you even need a fancy camera. When I first started selling online, I thought my pieces weren't good, but that wasn't the truth. It was actually that my photos weren't good. Now, before I became a ceramicist, my careers were very visually heavy. So before this, I was in marketing, I was a graphic designer, and a photographer. And I also learned a little bit of videography here and there. That doesn't mean that I translated over to my ceramic sales and photography very well. Really critical of the work that I was doing, but as I mentioned in my previous video of lessons that I learned of opening a pottery studio, is that you don't have to be perfect in order to get started. Therefore, my photos were not all that great. Sure, they were good, but they were not to the standard that I actually liked, and it didn't feel like I had a brand in myself or there was any consistency. And it was all because of my setup. My setup was not consistent. So let's talk about number one, the setup. One, you can do indoors or you can do outdoors, and I have tips for both. If you're going to be shooting outdoors, you want to do it closer to golden hour, and I would opt in for more of like a light wood background versus fabric, and that's because fabric is going to have a lot more contrast within all of the folds that the fabric are gonna have. Wood, because it's just a flat surface, it's gonna remove some of that contrast that could be distracting. And all of the tips that I provide for the indoor lighting also applies to outdoor, but if you want a separate video on how to specifically do outdoor photography for your pieces, I can also provide that. So let's talk about the indoors. When it comes to the indoors, you're gonna want to be in front of a natural window. So you see that right here, I have an east, well, you can't see, but based on the lighting, you can tell that I have an east facing window, and I do have some linen curtains to soften up some of that light. When it comes to this, the time of day really matters. So for outdoors, again, I would recommend something more like golden hour, so maybe an hour before the sun sets, versus indoors, I want to do something earlier in the day because I do have an east facing window. So for me right now, I'm shooting at 10 in the morning, and this is really nice lighting that I do enjoy. That goes a lot more with my brand itself. The reason why I'm mentioning the brand is because you want to have that consistency all throughout, which doing these tips are going to help you build that consistency that could ultimately help you build your brand. Apart from the basic lighting and keeping it simple, the other suggestion I have when it comes to doing the setup would be to batch shoot your work. And that means that you have all your work set up and you have it good to go to start bringing in piece by piece, design by design. And that's because you want to maintain consistency throughout all of your pieces so everything feels cohesive within your listings or within your posts for social media. And with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about lighting. Now, lighting is going to be different for every single person, but I think these tips are really going to help out, especially for those of us that are barely starting off or don't want to invest into photography equipment, and that's going to be using natural light. So as I mentioned, I'm using this east facing window, and because my style is, again, a little bit more earthy and organic and a lot of neutrals, I want to keep it as minimal as possible and as soft as possible. So I'm not going to be buying those overhead lights that could be pretty expensive, or even if you buy like the $50 ones off of Amazon, let me tell you right now, it's not necessary to start off. Yes, it's a good resource. Yes, it'd be nice to have, but if you're just starting off and if you're more of like an earthy potter, I don't think it's necessary at all. The next tip I have for you is to avoid having multiple light bulbs as a main source of lighting. And that's not to say that you can't have any fun like lighting in the background when you're shooting projects. I think it just really depends. For the purpose of this video, we're just talking about product photography where you're focusing on the product itself and your work. We're not necessarily doing like lifestyle shoots where it could be fun to incorporate that. But when it comes to like product photography, you want to make sure that your piece is the one that's getting all the attention and there's no distraction in the background. And having multiple sources of lighting can actually be a distraction. So an example of this is and it's like lighting from your actual bedroom or like kitchen, wherever you're shooting, you want to make sure those are off because they can be giving a different hue from what the actual natural source is providing. So if I had any lights in my room installed, that could give more of a yellow hue and it would clash, like you have yellow from up top and then you would have a softer white from the side, and it could be very hard to remove those yellow hues in post-production. One, that's gonna be a whole headache in itself trying to figure out how to do it. But if your pieces do have any yellow undertones, you could be removing those yellow undertones from your work that you really want to show, just because you're trying to remove the yellow undertones from the lighting above you. So with that being said, don't even deal with that. It could either be yellow or it could give off more blue. Regardless, keep the lighting off and just rely on natural light. Now, another tip, if you wanted to go that extra step that I personally do not use because I like the contrast in my photos, but it could be to use a reflector. Now, a reflector is going to help bounce that natural light back to your piece, because light is going to bounce off and you want to make sure you capture that light back. So then right here where there are some shadows, it softens up those shadows. I personally like having that little contrast in my photos, as you can see here, but if you wanted to go a little bit softer, this is how you could do that. Yes, if you know how to remove some of that contrastiness or remove a little bit of the shadow in post-production, you can for sure do that, but this is all about maintaining that consistency so you can have that brand set up for yourself. Reflector isn't necessary. I don't think so. When starting off, it's definitely a plus if you have it, depending on how you like your photos to be, but I don't think it's necessarily a you have to have a reflector. It's nice to have a reflector, but with my current style, I haven't seen that it's a necessity for my photo shoots. Obviously, as a photographer, this is me being a little bit nitpicky because I can see what's wrong with it. People can always feel a certain way about a photo without actually knowing to what degree it's making them feel that way or where it's coming from. When it comes to lighting, you want to make sure that it's going to be nice and soft, and even if you're shooting outdoors where it's a little bit harsher, you can also soften it up a little bit to make it a little bit softer to the eye so your eye can really focus onto the piece itself. Again, we're trying to keep the distractions very minimal, and we want to make sure that your piece and your work is the highlight of everything so people can fall in love with it versus trying to figure out like what's happening here. So now that we've covered the setup and we've covered the lighting, let's go ahead and talk about the actual angles itself. Now I can see where this is what can stress people out and they're like, Misha, like I don't know what angles to do. I don't know what's good. I feel like just one photo is good. It's showing my entire piece. Like, why do I need more photos? Now, my answer to that is the angles are gonna sell. Now, as I've shot and as I've done a lot of product photography for my pieces this past year and trying to keep consistency and see what is actually capturing the attention of people, I've noticed that these 3 angles are the ones that are gonna help you get those sales. So let's talk about what the shots are. The first shot is going to be a standalone. Very basic, most likely what people are doing anyways. But the reason why we want a standalone shot is because you want to see the piece in its entirety. You want to know what you're looking at essentially. So standalone shot, perfect. Most likely we're all doing that, but I like having this as my first photo because you want to have like an establishing shot. You want to show people what they're looking at as an entirety, and then you can start going in a little bit more zoomed in, a little bit more detailed shots, which brings us to the second point, which is all about texture. After you got your main shot where you see the entirety of your piece, you're going to want to do a close-up of the texture, and that's because you want to show people what the actual clay looks like. Ultimately, by showing the texture, you can kind of get a sense of what it's going to feel like. If you have a clay that's a little bit more groggier, then you can see the texture within that, and the audience can start to imagine this is gonna be a little bit rougher. It could be a little bit better for the grip, you know, or if they want something that's a little bit softer, they can really admire the softness of the clay because you've done your work of sanding down your pieces. So you want to get that close-up shot where you really show the texture, but it's not even just the texture, but you also want to show the glaze, whether it has any variation, whether it's matte, like all of these different things that we know behind the glazes. This is where we can really showcase that work. Whether you are doing some sgraffito, whether you're doing taping techniques, it's just the contrast of the glaze and the clay itself, or 2 glazes overlapping. You really want to show that. If you have any attachments, like I do mugs, I like showing the actual handle close up so people can see the texture within it, but also like the lines that are coming in the actual piece itself. So when it comes to mugs, I like doing close up of the handles. If I'm doing a sort of like half dip glaze, I like to get the close up on that half dip so you can see the contrast between the glaze and the clay itself. If you have a piece where you don't know what the close-up should be, please leave it down in the comments below and I can help with some ideas. So now that we have the entirety of our piece, we have a close-up, it's time to do shot number 3, which is going to be an in-hand shot. All that means is literally hold whatever you're photographing. Now, because I do like having that little contrast and have it as like a secondary like whole shot of my piece, I do like to angle it off a little bit so you can still see the inside of the piece, especially for the travel tumblers that do have that lid attachment to it. I want to angle it off a little bit so you can see that attachment right there and people know that it's not just a cup or a vase or the go-to toothbrush holder. You want to be able to tell a little bit of that story behind it. But what I have found is that the reason why this shot does so well is because you're holding the piece and people can visualize themselves holding that piece and they get a better understanding of sizing. Not everyone is going to understand what 9 centimeters wide might be, but if you hold a piece, it gives them a better idea. Yes, everyone's hands are different. I understand that, but it gives a better understanding of what the sizing is like when it actually comes to somebody imagining and picturing themselves holding that item or owning that item. Now, here is a bonus shot. I actually enjoy having all of my pieces photographed together if it's the same design but different glazes, and this allows people to kind of compare the different glazes side by side without having to flip back and forth between the photos. So if you can have all of your pieces together, try creating a little bit of dimension in it. As you'll see in my photos, I like to kind of stack my pieces where you have one in the front, in the middle, and the back. Typically, I just go for 3 different glazes when it comes to my pieces, trying to keep it very minimal. Obviously, as I have seasonal pieces coming out, then all the colors are going to be the same. But I do like having like a brighter one towards the front, and then maybe a darker one in the middle, and then another maybe like middle color in a way in the back. And that's because I don't want it to feel like the dark one is in the back and now it's like hidden, blended, forgotten. And I don't want it in the front necessarily because it could be a little bit distracting with how harsh it is in the front. So that's why I have staggered it, where I either have the green or the red up front, then the charcoal in the middle, and the green or the red in the back. And I'll alternate the green and the red right now within my style. That way it doesn't feel like it's the same over and over and over again when you're looking at my listings entirely. There's a little bit of variation in that, which is me being a little bit intentional with how I'm doing my photography. Is this necessary? No, but it's just like a nice little tip to really challenge you to start thinking, how can I be more intentional with my photography? And it doesn't mean doing a whole bunch. The setup is the same, the lighting is the same, the photos are the same. It's just a matter of where you're placing your pieces, because that could honestly make it or break it for you. It creates a little bit of variation while maintaining that familiarity that is within your pieces. So now on to the famous question on whether a camera is worth investing or whether you should stick with your iPhone. So I have the iPhone 15 Pro, and a lot of people have asked me whether my photography is with a camera, whether it's with iPhone, and I actually use both. When it comes to product photography, I enjoy using a lot more my camera. So I currently have Sony Alpha 7 IV. This camera is pricey. So the only reason why I got this Sony is because, one, I'm primarily using it for videography, but I do like utilizing this for my product photography because I do like the blurriness that it could give in separating the background from my actual pieces, and it really elevates my textured photos. I've taken most of my product photography photos with my Sony camera, and honestly, I love it. For me, it's more of like, it puts me into a different headspace that goes back to my creative root, taps in a little bit more of my creativity, and it makes me feel a little bit more elevated versus when I try to take the same photos with my phone. I cannot do it for some reason. I go very more like casual, and that just has to do with my mindset, guys. But I actually took photos of my work with the Sony camera and with my iPhone, and using all the tips that I have shared, so you can see that when it comes to the difference, it's not all that much. You can actually get really great photos with your iPhone as well. When it comes to shooting on iPhone, I recommend shooting on portrait mode, but if you scroll on over, it's going to go to portrait. Keep it under the natural light, and then just take photos. And that's because when you do have a photo that is in portrait mode, there's actually a little button that you can click on the top left that says portrait, and you can actually click on portrait off, and that will give you the photo without the portrait mode. In portrait mode, all it means is that it's going to make the background blurry, so it separates the background from the actual subject you're taking a photo of. But always make sure that you are in focus when you're shooting in portrait mode, because you don't want the wrong thing to be in focus. So you'll see that I have in hand shot right there, and the close-up for the texture, and then this last one is all of my pieces together so people can compare the glazes one from the other. So you'll see that between the two photos of the Sony versus the iPhone, they're pretty similar, but what really stands out is the actual consistency with the photos. Yes, we have consistency within the time that we're shooting, the lighting, the setup, the actual angles itself. What could actually create even more emphasis and consistency is the way that we edit. Let's talk about editing. Now, editing is kind of like the fine tuning that you're going to have within your pieces. You want to keep it simple. All I do is literally focus on the exposure, the contrast, and the white balance, and then ultimately the crop of it. For those of you that are concerned that you're gonna have to get an expensive software like Lightroom, honestly, like you can download the free version for your phone, and that's great. I have never been able to get used to Lightroom as the app. My favorite is Visco, VSCO. Whatever you prefer, go for it. I like saying Visco. Right here, we're gonna open up the Visco app and we're going to import our photos real quick. This one right here is one of the mugs that I'm currently going to be listing for the fall. I go on over to the exposure, bring it up just a tad bit, and then increase the contrast a little bit, because on my iPhone it does show a little bit more contrast. I don't like how intense the shadows are, so that's just a little tweak I'm going to do for this specific photo. Turn up the brightness just because I like my photos to be a little bit more bright and airy. We already added a little bit of contrast to make a separation between the background and the photo itself, but we toned down the shadows because this was already a little bit dark as it was. When it comes to shooting the photos, yes, you want to keep them a little bit bright and airy, but don't overexpose it. And by that I mean don't have the entire background blown out where it just looks like a white void, because you are going to be losing a little bit of that texture in the background, and we want to maintain a little bit of that texture. So it's always better to shoot a photo a little bit darker, because you can always brighten it up and you're not going to lose that texture or details, versus if you shoot something very, very bright, then you lose all of those details and you're not able to bring back those details even if you make the photo a little bit darker by adjusting the exposure. So always think a little bit darker is better versus a little bit too bright where you lose all the details. And then I'm just going to go on over and add a little bit more warmth to my photo, because I like having warm photos. Now, this is what I really enjoy about my product photography, is that I use the rule of thirds. Ultimately, all that means is that I want to maintain the actual product within all of these within all of these 4 points right there. So I'm going to straighten this out a little bit, because it was on a bed, so it wasn't completely straight, completely okay. And then I'm just gonna use the crop of 4x5. I'm gonna bring this a little bit in right here. So because this piece does have a handle, it's gonna be a little bit off the rule of thirds, but ultimately I'm trying to make sure that my piece is meeting the top in that upper line, and then the bottom is meeting that lower line right there. Keeping the balance between the handle and the actual outer end of my mug. And now this feels a little bit more balanced, and you'll see that the editing, it is very minimal, but you want to keep it as true as possible to the actual piece itself, and that's because you don't want to alter it so much that people will have the wrong expectation. So like for this, it's not changing the color all that much, it's just brightening up the photo a bit more. You never want to be caught up in a disagreement where like the pieces don't actually reflect or the in-person photo. Obviously, we have to give those disclaimers of like the color can vary from monitor to monitor, but you don't want to be so crazy with it where like people don't recognize the piece at all because of the actual glaze and the coloring due to the editing that we did. You want to allow your work to speak for itself and for it to really shine in its natural state, and you want to mimic that natural state as much as possible. Therefore, keep it as organic as possible, do very minimal lighting, very minimal setup, and very minimal editing. That way it can be as true to its nature as possible. That is essentially all of my beginner tips that I have for you that are trying to take photos of your product photography in order to either list them on Etsy, on your website, or just post on social media to promote your work. It's nothing fancy. I can't stress enough about how you don't have to have all this fancy equipment or have a super fancy setup in order to get started. I honestly love the setup that I have right now because it is so minimal, especially when you have a bunch of different pieces. Maintaining a minimal setup really allows you to get a lot more work done versus trying to bring all of these different props in could actually, one, distract from your actual work, and it could actually slow you down in the process if you have a lot of pieces. Now, again, this is all focused on product photography, where we're trying to really emphasize the focus on the piece itself. It is not a focus for lifestyle photography, and that is a whole thing on its own that we can cover at a later video. But let me know, which part do you want a future video for? Let me know what other questions you have, but for now, that is all. Keep on creating and connecting. By the way, we're going to start a little market series where we're going to talk about how to plan the items you're going to be selling at the market, how to do the production. I'm going to bring you along for the market, and then we'll have a little conversation at the end on how the market went and what we could have done better and what went very well. So stay tuned for that.